Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere that smells faintly of leather, horse sweat, and dry grass. You're standing. Well, let's be honest, you're barely standing. In the middle of a Mongolian steppe so wide that your phone's GPS would probably just give up and say good luck. The horizon is a blur, melting into a blue so pale it feels like the sky forgot to load properly. Wind brushes against your ears like a lazy whisper, carrying the scent of dust, distant campfire smoke, and perhaps fermented mare's milk, which, trust me, is exactly as alarming as it sounds. You pull your cloak tighter. It's 1,240-something. Give or take a horse hoof, and the Mongol Empire stretches from the frozen edges of Russia to the warm coasts of China. Somewhere out there, between the shifting dunes and endless plains, rides a courier carrying a message sealed with the Khan's personal mark, a message that could change a kingdom's fate or simply remind someone that they still owe taxes. And you? You're here to follow those riders, the unsung postmen of history, across a network so advanced that even Amazon Prime would weep in envy. But first, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The steppe stretches before you, not empty, not silent, but alive in a subtle, whispering way. The grass shifts like the surface of the sea, each blade swaying to its own rhythm. Somewhere nearby, a horse snorts impatiently. Its breath rises like steam in the cold morning air. You can almost hear the sound of its hooves sinking into the soil, a heartbeat echoing across centuries. You start walking, or maybe floating. It's hard to tell in dreams. The world feels endless, but there's a pattern here, faint as a map drawn in invisible ink. Tiny dots, the postal stations, or Yam, scatter across the empire. Each one sits a day's ride from the next, stocked with fresh horses, food, and sometimes gossip more valuable than gold. It's strange to think about, but these outposts, simple huts of felt and wood, were the arteries of an empire that once ruled a quarter of the known world. A courier could ride from Beijing to the Caspian Sea in just a few weeks. Compare that to your last international shipment that took 3 months and arrived smelling faintly of disappointment. You spot a station ahead, a cluster of low huts, smoke curling lazily from a chimney. A man in fur greets you with a nod that says, "You're late, but I don't care enough to say it." He wears a simple leather vest, but hanging around his neck is something glimmering, a small, rectangular tablet engraved with strange marks. Later, you'll learn this is a peza, the imperial pass that grants him freedom to cross borders and demand fresh horses at every stop. It's like having a VIP card for the entire continent. As he sips his salty tea, it's a thing, you'll have to accept it. He gestures toward the horizon. There's no road, no signs, just instinct and memory. The Mongols didn't need Google Maps. They had the wind, the stars, and a mental GPS calibrated by generations of herders who could tell direction by the texture of the grass. The man speaks softly, telling you about his route, from Karakoram to Samarkand. 2,000 miles of plains, rivers, and mountains. He carries news of births, alliances, betrayals, and the occasional grocery list from the great Khan himself. Speed, he says, is everything. And when he says it, you realize that this entire system, this network of riders, is what kept the empire breathing. At night, when the moon rises like a silver coin tossed by a careless god, he ties his horse near the fire and wraps himself in a wool blanket. The sky above him is littered with stars so dense that even insomnia would give up halfway through counting them. You lie beside him, half listening to the wind's lullaby, half terrified that a wolf might mistake you for a midnight snack. But there's something soothing about it. This endless rhythm of riding and resting, of delivering and departing. It's the hum of purpose, the quiet song of a civilization that thrived not on walls or monuments, but on movement. You close your eyes, imagining the thousands of riders before you, all following the same invisible path, one hoofbeat after another, like a soft drum roll across time. And as the fire crackles, you think, the empire didn't conquer the world with swords alone, it did it with messages. Some historians still debate whether the Mongol postal network truly covered all the lands it claimed. Others argue it was more myth than map. But as you drift further into the night, listening to the faint thud of hooves echoing through the dark, you can almost believe it. The steps sighs, the horses rest, and tomorrow, the ride continues. The night fades slowly, like ink thinning in a bowl of water. When you open your eyes again, the world is dipped in a pale gold that stretches endlessly. Somewhere in that stillness, a low sound hums, hoofbeats, slow at first, then steadier, like a drum keeping time for the dawn. You mount your horse, or at least, the horse graciously allows you to sit on it, and set off toward the horizon. The air tastes sharp, clean, and just a little bit judgmental. You remember the courier from last night, his peza glinting under the stars, and realize you're now part of something bigger. A system built not from stone or steel, but from motion itself. These are the whispers of hoofbeats that stitched the Mongol Empire together. Imagine it, an empire so vast that a messenger could ride for weeks and still be within its borders. A horse would gallop through frozen forests in Siberia, splash through rivers near Persia, and cross the sands of Gobi, all in the name of communication. The Mongols called it the Yam system, a relay network of stations and couriers, one of the first organized postal systems in the world. If you squint, you could almost see the ghosts of it today in your inbox, except your emails don't arrive on horseback or smell faintly of yak butter. Each courier rode with purpose, switching horses at every stop, sometimes every 25 miles, to keep speed constant. The horses knew the rhythm by heart. Some historians say they could sense the next station long before it appeared, as if the earth itself hummed a familiar tune beneath their hooves. You pass one of those relay stations now. The stable hands move briskly, replacing saddles, feeding the next mount, checking shoes. The air is filled with snorts, laughter, and the faint clink of iron. A weary rider hands over a scroll sealed in red wax, then collapses on a mat and falls asleep mid-sentence. You can't blame him. He's probably ridden 100 kilometers today, powered solely by fermented milk and spite. It's easy to romanticize them. These riders, men who defied weather, exhaustion, and boredom to keep an empire informed. But let's be honest, they probably smelled like damp fur and bad decisions. One Chinese official once complained that Mongol couriers rode like thunder and smelled like camels. A compliment? Maybe. Depends on your perspective. Still, their efficiency was unmatched. A message could travel from Karakoram to the Caspian in a fraction of the time any other empire could manage. Traders, envoys, even spies used the Yam roads. Every hoofbeat echoed with secrets, battle plans, royal births, invitations to distant banquets that no one wanted to attend but everyone feared to decline. At midday, you stop near a shallow stream. The air buzzes faintly with insects, and the grass bends under a playful wind. You can almost hear the murmurs of 1,000 journeys blending together, the chatter of couriers, the sigh of horses, the laughter of someone retelling a story for the 100th time because the road leaves too much room for silence. Some say, your guide murmurs, eyes half closed from the glare, that the riders used rhythm to keep time. The sound of hooves, steady as a heartbeat, was their clock. You test it, counting 1 hoofbeat per breath, and realize how strange it feels to move in perfect sync with the land. Later, you reach a ridge where the steppe unfurls like a map carved by the wind. Below, faint trails snake across the plain, invisible highways connecting the empire. From here, it looks peaceful, but in your bones, you feel the hum of urgency that never truly stopped. The empire depended on those hoofbeats. Orders, taxes, alliances, all lived and died by them. A single message, you recall from a tale whispered around the fire, could save 1,000 lives or doom 10,000 more. And yet, here in the soft light, The rider's purpose feels less like politics and more like poetry. The beauty of motion itself, the discipline of distance, the comfort of repetition. As the day wanes, the wind shifts. It carries the faintest trace of music, or maybe it's just the saddle creaking in rhythm. You close your eyes, letting the sound of hooves merge with your heartbeat. The step is endless, but it feels smaller now, more intimate, like a secret being told over and over until it becomes truth. Historians still debate how many stations existed. Some say over 1,000, others claim twice that. They argue over distances, horses, names long forgotten. But the truth, if it matters, isn't in the numbers. It's in the rhythm. Those quiet hoofbeats whispering through centuries, still echoing somewhere between memory and dream. You take a deep breath, the kind that fills your lungs with silence. Somewhere behind you, another rider saddles up, another journey begins. The wind rises, soft and steady. And just like that, the empire breathes again. The road, or what passes for one, unfurls before you like a lazy ribbon drawn across the skin of the earth. There are no signs, no milestones, no "you are here" markers, just an infinite blend of gold and green, rippling under a sky so huge it makes you feel like a particularly unimportant grain of sand. But you keep riding, because that's what the Mongol couriers did. Forward. Always forward. If you ever tried navigating your city without Google Maps, you'd last about 4 turns before ending up in a parking lot, arguing with your reflection in the windshield. But these riders? They memorized the world. Every bend of a river, every patch of grass that grew a shade darker near groundwater, they knew it by heart. It wasn't a map on parchment, it was a map in muscle memory. The Mongols didn't think in borders the way we do. The Yam network spanned everything from frozen taiga to Persian gardens, and yet no one built fences to mark the edges. The riders didn't see lines, they saw paths. It's one of those rare historical facts that's somehow both poetic and practical. As you cross a shallow valley, the wind grows playful. It lifts strands of your hair, sneaks beneath your cloak, and tugs you onward. You pass a lone tree bent from centuries of wind, its bark stripped smooth as bone. Below it lies a stone carved with old runes, half erased, half remembered. You pause, wondering if it once marked a station, or maybe a grave of someone who rode too far into the storm. The truth is, no one really knows where every path of the Yam went. Even the best historians admit the routes were fluid, shifting with seasons and safety. Sometimes, the riders followed trade caravans. Other times, they blazed their own trails. The Mongol post wasn't a single road. It was a web of possibility, spreading wherever the empire's pulse demanded. You imagine the scale of it. From the Pacific coast to the plains of Hungary, from Siberian forests to Persian deserts. Riders crossed mountains where air grew thin and rivers where bridges were only rumors. And somehow, through it all, the messages kept moving. Orders from the Great Khan reached generals thousands of miles away faster than most medieval kings could summon their courtiers across town. You reach a high plateau, and the world tilts beneath you, a breathtaking panorama of light and distance. It's easy to forget you're looking at a communication network, not a landscape painting. Below, faint trails braid together, crossing rivers, splitting at ridges, rejoining farther off. You can almost trace the routes with your finger, like invisible threads sewn into the skin of the continent. A small joke drifts through your mind. If the Mongols had used Wi-Fi, the connection would have covered half the planet, but still dropped right when you needed it most. Your horse shifts its weight, hooves crunching softly on dry soil. In the far distance, a cluster of tents shimmers in the heat haze. Another Yam station, maybe. Or maybe just a mirage. You blink, and it's gone. As the sun climbs higher, the heat thickens into something almost visible. You taste dust. The air hums. You think about how those couriers endured it daily. The glare, the thirst, the solitude. Every sense tuned not toward comfort, but survival. They didn't have compasses or maps. Instead, they followed instinct and stars, the way you follow the faint glow of your phone at night, pretending it's a guiding light. At dusk, You stop by a narrow stream lined with willows. You can hear the rustle of their leaves, like whispered advice from the past. The sky turns lavender, then indigo. In that soft light, you realize how strange it is. This whole empire, this living map without borders, was held together not by conquest alone, but by the fragile thread of communication. Some people think the roads ended. You murmur to yourself, but maybe they just changed names. After all, isn't the internet just a digital yam? Messages still racing from one station to the next, powered by invisible riders. The only difference is, now they wear hoodies instead of fur and travel at the speed of light, instead of the speed of hooves. Somewhere behind you, a hawk cries, a single sharp sound that fades into silence. You look up and almost see the ghost of a rider cresting the horizon, a dark figure against the pale sky, pushing onward toward the next dot on that map without borders. Historians still argue about where it all began. Some say the first station was built under Genghis Khan himself. Others credit Ogdi, his son, for formalizing the system. But maybe the truth doesn't need an author. Maybe it's just what happens when humans decide that distance should never mean disconnection. The night cools. The air smells faintly of smoke and horsehair. You close your eyes, listening to the pulse of hoofbeats echoing in your imagination, soft, steady, endless. And for a moment, you feel it, the empire breathing beneath you, every path alive with motion. Morning arrives like a polite knock on the door, soft, insistent, and impossible to ignore. The world is washed in pale silver mist, and your horse snorts, unimpressed by the poetry of it all. The dew glistens on your boots, and you stretch your legs, feeling the dull ache of a night spent halfway between dream and saddle. Somewhere, a raven calls, because even in the 13th century, nature loved a little drama. You ride again, guided only by the faint trails of hooves before you. The grass parts gently, as if remembering the thousands who passed this way long before you. You can almost feel their presence, a spectral company of couriers, each clutching a message that might change a life or end one. The wind grows colder as you climb toward a ridge. There, standing solitary and sun-bleached, you see a wooden post topped with an emblem carved in intricate spirals. It's a symbol of the Khan's authority, and more importantly, a checkpoint for those who carried the empire's heartbeat. Your companion from the previous station, a grizzled courier with eyes like chipped flint, tells you about the Pesa, a small metal tablet that made the impossible possible. With this, he says, lifting the engraved square to catch the dawn light, you can cross any border, demand food, horses, and even shelter. Without it, you are just another fool on a horse. You reach out, tracing your finger across its surface. The script glows faintly, letters hammered by imperial blacksmiths and blessed by the court scribes. Gold, silver, copper. The Pesa came in ranks, each one a passport, a badge of trust, and sometimes a shield against suspicion. The courier chuckles. It's like your passport and your celebrity badge in one. People bow, gates open, bread appears. He pauses, his voice dropping to a whisper. But lose it, and not even the wind will speak for you. He tells you a story, one of those half-myths historians argue about. A rider once lost his Pesa while crossing a river swollen with meltwater. When he arrived at the next station, drenched and shivering, they turned him away. He vanished into the plains, swallowed by silence. Weeks later, a shepherd found his horse grazing alone, saddle empty. The Pesa, they say, was found months later, lodged in the roots of a willow tree downstream. You stare at the horizon, thinking how strange it is that an empire could depend so heavily on a piece of metal no bigger than your palm. But power often hides in small things, a seal, a coin, a whisper. The courier shows you his own, a bronze plate etched with Mongol script. He tells you it's been passed down from his grandfather, who rode for Ogdi Khan himself. It's worn smooth by decades of touch, proof that authority, too, can become intimate when held long enough. You wonder if he ever used it for mischief, maybe skipped a long queue for food, or talked his way into a warm yurt on a freezing night. He grins as if reading your thoughts. We are messengers, he says. We don't lie. We just deliver truths in more convenient packaging. The sun climbs higher, burning through the mist. The world sharpens. Distant mountains rise like the backs of sleeping giants, and the air begins to shimmer. You ride alongside him for hours, neither speaking much. Words seem unnecessary when the land itself is talking. The grass hums under the wind. The horses breathe in rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmurs like an impatient god clearing his throat. At the next stop, a wooden sign greets you with characters scorched into it. Yam, it reads, as though the land itself is whispering, "Welcome to the pulse of the empire." A young attendant rushes out, bowing quickly, then leads fresh horses from the stable. The courier hands over his message, receives a new one in return, and takes a gulp of tea so strong it could dissolve anxiety itself. You take a sip too. It's salty, oily, and somehow comforting. "It keeps you awake," he says. You nod, pretending to agree, though your tongue is now staging a mild protest. You notice a row of riders waiting, each carrying a different peza, some polished to shine, others dull with use. They nod politely at one another, like members of an exclusive club bound not by words, but by the shared exhaustion of duty. Some say the Khan could send a message across 10,000 miles and get a reply before the ink dried. The attendant remarks with quiet pride. You glance at him skeptically, but he only smiles. The Khan believed speed was loyalty. The faster you rode, the truer you were. The idea sticks with you as you ride on. Speed as devotion, distance as faith. It makes a strange kind of sense. The empire's arteries were made of dust and hoof prints, and its heart beat through the peza, a symbol of trust stronger than walls. Historians still debate who designed the peza. Some say it came from Chinese traditions, others trace it to Persian seals. But maybe it doesn't matter. Like the riders themselves, the idea was nomadic. It borrowed, adapted, and kept moving. The sun sinks low again, smearing the horizon with gold and rust. You watch your companion ride ahead, the peza at his chest catching the last light like a second, smaller sun. For a moment, you think, that's what power really looks like. Not a crown or a throne, but a promise that keeps moving. The wind rises. The grass whispers. Somewhere, another rider begins his journey, clutching his own small piece of authority, unaware that centuries later, someone, maybe you, would still be following the echo of his hoofbeats. By the time the next dawn breaks, the world smells of dust, tea, and deadlines, a trifecta no courier could escape. You wake to find frost creeping over your saddle like tiny shards of forgotten stars. Your breath comes out in clouds, and the air bites just enough to remind you that the empire runs on discomfort and caffeine. The camp is already alive. Horses snort steam into the morning chill, their tails flicking at invisible pests. Somewhere nearby, a kettle rattles over a low flame, and the scent of buttered tea slinks through the cold. You watch a rider gulp his cup, wince, and immediately saddle up again. No stretching, no breakfast, no motivational podcast. Just motion. Always motion. You think about your own mornings, hitting snooze 3 times, maybe checking emails, maybe regretting life. The Mongol courier didn't have that luxury. For him, dawn wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. The empire waited for no one. He'd pack light, a bow, a few arrows for persuasion, dried curds, a pouch of tea leaves, and a letter sealed with authority. Then, he'd ride into the horizon, where every minute mattered and every mile was a test of endurance. The riders followed an unspoken rule: never delay, never question, never read what you carry. And though historians love to debate whether this discipline came from fear or faith, you suspect it was something simpler: habit. A rhythm of life that left no room for hesitation. As you ride again, the world changes tone. The sun softens the frost, the wind warms a little, and the land begins to hum. Not loudly, just a low vibration that seems to come from everywhere at once. You imagine the network alive beneath your feet. Thousands of couriers moving like a single organism, their hoofbeats syncing across continents. The courier beside you, a woman this time, her braids thick as rope, glances over and smiles. You ride quiet, she says. That's good. The steppe doesn't like chatter. You nod, though a small part of you misses the sound of modern noise, traffic, playlists, maybe even the hum of an espresso machine. Out here, the loudest thing is your heartbeat. She offers you a sip of her tea, which tastes like someone boiled the inside of a leather boot, but with love. It's not the taste, she explains, it's the warmth. Warmth keeps you sane. You ask how far she rides in a day. She shrugs. As far as the horse can dream. Then, almost offhandedly, she adds, we change mounts often. The horses rest, we don't. It's the way of things. You notice the saddlebag slung across her back. Patched, worn, but sturdy. She carries 2 messages. One from the Khan, the other from a merchant in Samarkand. One could decide the fate of a city, the other, just a shipment of spices. Yet both are treated with the same care. In this world, every message matters equally. Midday brings wind and dust. You wrap your scarf tighter and squint ahead. The horizon blurs. The air smells of metal and distance. The courier hums softly under her breath, a tune with no words, passed down from one rider to another. You don't ask what it means. Some things are better left untranslated. When you finally reach the next station, it's perched beside a frozen river. Wooden huts creak under the weight of snow. The station master greets you with a nod, his beard stiff with ice. Another rider, he says. Good. The last one fainted before he finished his sentence. You trade horses, drink more tea that tastes like persistence, and listen to the chatter. Riders share stories of sandstorms, wolves, and one unforgettable encounter with a yak that refused to yield the road. There's laughter, but it's tired laughter, the kind that comes from people who've accepted that exhaustion is a permanent roommate. Sometimes, the station master muses, we forget what we carry. We just know we must keep it safe. He looks at you with eyes that seem to see beyond your century. You modern ones, you carry messages faster. But are they any lighter? You don't answer. The question lingers, settling into the quiet like an uninvited guest. Outside, the sky fades into twilight. You mount a new horse, stronger, younger, impatient to run. The courier waves you off, her silhouette framed against the dying light. As you gallop into the dusk, the cold air stings your face, and the rhythm of hooves drowns out every other thought. You think about the thousands of riders before you, their mornings of tea, dust, and deadlines. The empire depended on their constancy. They were, in a way, the first pulse of globalization, the human veins through which the world began to circulate information. Historians still debate whether these couriers were paid or simply compelled by duty. Some say they were honored servants. Others claim they were prisoners of pace. But the truth, as usual, rides somewhere in between. The stars bloom one by one above you, steady and bright. You feel the cool air on your cheeks, the weight of history pressing softly on your shoulders. The road hums. The world breathes. And in that moment, you realize you're not riding through history. History is riding through you. By the time you reach the edge of the plains, the earth itself has changed texture. The grass thins into brittle yellow strands. The soil turns the color of rust, and the wind begins to whistle instead of whisper. Ahead of you lies a landscape that looks like it hasn't decided whether it wants to be a desert or an ice field. And on certain days, it's both. This is the part of the Mongol postal route where comfort goes to die. Frozen lakes to the north, burning sands to the south. The riders didn't have the luxury of choice. The message had to move, whether the wind froze your eyelashes or the sun peeled your thoughts. You adjust your scarf, which does approximately nothing. The cold gnaws through the fabric, biting your fingertips like a mildly offended god. The horse exhales a plume of steam and keeps moving, step after steady step. There's a rhythm here, a strange, hypnotic pulse that lulls your thoughts into silence. The world shrinks to the sound of hooves, wind, and the occasional creak of your saddle. When you finally speak, your voice comes out rough, as though it's been stored somewhere too dry for too long. You remember what one of the station masters told you before you left. There are only 2 kinds of riders out here, the ones who respect the land and the ones who become part of it. You laughed at the time. Now you realize he wasn't joking. The path ahead is a blur of snow and sand. Sometimes you can't tell if the white shimmer in the distance is sunlight or ice. The horizon bends in ways that make your eyes doubt themselves. You think you see movement, a caravan perhaps, but when you blink, it's gone. Mirage or memory, the steppe doesn't care. The riders who braved this stretch had tricks for survival. They'd wrap their faces in felt soaked with animal fat to trap warmth, sleep beside their horses for heat, and melt snow in their helmets for water. Some carried small pouches of salt and dried meat. Others relied on luck and stubbornness. You stop by a frozen stream, cracking through the thin ice to drink. The water tastes like silence, sharp, clean, eternal. Your reflection looks older than you remember. The cold has a way of erasing vanity. A sudden gust hits, stinging your eyes. The horse flinches, muscles twitching. You steady it gently, whispering nonsense the way couriers used to. Sounds more than words, rhythm more than meaning. They believed that tone could calm a beast better than language. Maybe they were right. Maybe everything responds to a little kindness wrapped in confusion. By afternoon, the wind shifts. It carries warmth now, a breath from the southern plains. The snow thins, the ground turns hard, and the air smells faintly of dust and salt. You've crossed the invisible line between frozen north and burning south, a trick the earth performs without warning. The sand crunches under your boots when you dismount. The horse's hooves sink slightly, and you feel heat rising from below. You take a step, and your shadow seems to shimmer. The sun burns low, not cruelly, just with quiet persistence, like someone slowly turning up the brightness on existence. You find an abandoned yam post here, just the skeleton of one, really. A few beams, half-buried jars, a fallen sign. You run your hand along the charred wood. The riders who stopped here may have frozen, or burned, or simply vanished into the geography of exhaustion. There's no plaque, no record, only the wind to tell their stories, and it's terrible at pronunciation. Sitting by what used to be the hearth, you open your pack. Inside is dried curd, hard as stone but edible, allegedly. You gnaw at it anyway, because complaining won't get you far in a desert that doesn't negotiate. The taste is awful, but there's a comfort in the ritual. The couriers used to say, if you can chew it, you can survive it. You pull your cloak tighter and stare out at the landscape. The horizon flickers with heat, a mirage shaped like a city that doesn't exist. You think about how every empire eventually ends this way, in dust, illusion, and echoes. But for now, the Mongol network still thrums. Somewhere out there, another rider is pushing through this same wind, carrying a letter that might never be read, but must still be delivered. Some historians, you recall, believe the couriers used the stars to navigate across both ice and sand, the same constellations guiding them from night to night. Others claim they followed the flight of birds or the slope of the grass. But the truth, as always, is somewhere between skill and faith. You lie back on the warm sand. The sky above is impossibly wide, a sheet of blue so deep it feels like falling upward. Your eyelids grow heavy. For a moment, you imagine the couriers lying here centuries ago, resting in the same silence, their horses standing guard like patient statues. The wind softens, brushing over your face. It smells faintly of pine and ash, north and south meeting halfway. You smile without meaning to. Maybe that's the secret of the yam. It wasn't just about speed. It was about connection, between lands, between seasons, between people who never met but shared the same road. You close your eyes, and the sound of hoofbeats begins again, distant, steady, eternal. The same song, across frozen lakes and burning sands. The morning doesn't so much begin as it just quietly happens. You wake to the hiss of sand brushing against your tent, a kind of whispering applause from the desert itself. The air is already dry enough to make your thoughts feel crunchy. You taste salt and wind. Somewhere beyond the dunes, a horse nickers, impatient to start before the heat sets in. You rise slowly, stretching joints that feel borrowed from a much older version of yourself. A faint orange light spreads across the horizon. It's not gentle. It's the kind of dawn that doesn't ask if you're ready. The courier from last night. Yes, the one who swore she could sleep standing up. Hands you a roll of parchment bound in silk. From the Khan's envoy, she says. For the West. She doesn't need to explain further. You already know, the silk means diplomacy, not war. Or at least, that's the intention. In this empire, both often arrived in the same envelope. You tuck the scroll away carefully, next to another sealed in wax. You don't peek, of course. You wouldn't dare. But you can't help wondering. The weight of a single message, riding in your saddlebag, could be the difference between peace and siege. Between two kingdoms shaking hands or sharpening swords. Historians still debate the kind of messages that rode across these roads. Some were edicts and trade permits. Yes, but others, softer, stranger. Letters between scholars exchanging riddles. Notes from wives to husbands at the frontier. Even jokes copied and recopied by scribes to lighten the road's monotony. The 13th century version of memes, really. The Mongols prized information. They didn't just conquer land, they conquered communication. The Yam carried everything from military secrets to gossip about Persian poets. A message written on silk could cross half the world and still arrive legible, perfumed faintly with the scent of its sender's hand. You ride westward, the parchment rustling faintly in your pack. The road tilts downward into a shallow valley where the wind collects in spirals, tugging at your cloak. The horizon shimmers. You catch a glimpse of riders ahead. 2, maybe 3, each carrying banners marked with small crimson seals. They move in silence, close enough to smell the dust from one another's horses, but far enough not to share words. The desert teaches restraint. The path curves, and suddenly the air grows cooler. Ahead lies a cluster of tents trimmed in blue fabric, the colors of the Khan's diplomatic corps. A scribe kneels in the sand, weighing small bundles wrapped in silk and bound with thread. His fingers move delicately, like a man handling both treasure and trouble. Messages of silk. He murmurs as you approach, as if reading your thoughts. They travel lighter than iron, but can change more than any sword. He gestures for your bag. You hand it over reluctantly, watching as he unties each knot with the precision of a surgeon. Inside, you glimpse the shimmering edge of another silk scroll, a soft cream color that almost glows. The scribe doesn't read it aloud, of course, but he does smile faintly, a quiet, secret smile. Love letter, he whispers, between governors. Happens more than you'd think. You blink. Somehow, that feels perfectly human. Two officials writing flirty notes while pretending to discuss tax policy. Bureaucracy, it seems, has always had a romantic streak. He reseals the messages, ties them with new thread, and hands them back. Next stop, Karakoram relay, he says. They'll sort the rest. You pause before mounting again, glancing at the silk rolls in your pack. They look so fragile, soft fabric, faint ink, sometimes just a few lines of poetry or orders written by candlelight. Yet these delicate ribbons carried the empire's pulse. Messages of silk and blood, they called them. Because wherever diplomacy failed, war would ride next, swift as the wind, following the same paths. That thought lingers as you ride out of camp. The desert opens again, vast, endless, shimmering like molten glass. You pass skeletons of old outposts, sun-bleached wood, and forgotten tools half buried in sand. The wind sighs around them, carrying words that no one hears anymore. You find a moment's peace under a rock ledge, sipping lukewarm tea from a tin cup. The taste is still awful, but there's comfort in its predictability. The couriers once joked that the empire could fall, but the tea would remain. Some historians claim, you recall, that even enemy states used Mongol couriers to send letters safely. So reliable was the yam that no one dared interfere. It's a strange, almost tender thought, that amidst conquest and chaos, a network of trust quietly survived. The sun begins to sink. The light turns honey-colored, then amber, then red. The air smells faintly of smoke, someone cooking in a distant camp, maybe roasting lamb over coals. You let the scent drift over you, thinking of all the riders who once ended their day this same way. Tired, sore, but still moving towards somewhere that wasn't quite home. The stars will come soon, and with them, another night of silence and hoofbeats. The silk messages rustle softly in your pack, like whispers that refuse to sleep. And in that quiet, you realize something the scholars never quite capture. The Mongol couriers didn't just carry words. They carried continuity, the fragile thread that tied an empire together, one ride, one breath, one heartbeat at a time. Night falls like a curtain made of velvet and cold breath. The stars bloom again, impossibly bright, sharp enough to feel alive. And for a moment, the entire steppe glows in silver blue, the way frost catches moonlight on a window pane. You hear the steady rhythm of hooves before you see them, a wave of sound moving through the dark. Horses, dozens of them, snorting clouds of white into the thin air, restless but obedient. You've reached a relay hub, one of the empire's great ortage, the changing stations. The air is thick with motion. Men and women move briskly among the animals, swapping saddles, pouring water, checking hooves with the precision of surgeons. There's no shouting, only rhythm. This is a place that runs on sound and instinct. You dismount, legs wobbling slightly, and hand your reins to a stable boy who looks like he hasn't blinked since sunrise. He doesn't greet you, just whistles, and two more horses are brought forward. You notice how identical they seem. Same color, same height, same restless shimmer under the skin. You realize this is no accident. The Mongols bred their courier horses for endurance, not beauty. They were compact, stocky, and looked perpetually offended by gravity. But they were built to run, hour after hour, day after day, carrying messages that couldn't wait. A gray-haired handler hands you a cup of something that tastes like smoke, salt, and faint regret. Mare's milk, he explains, smiling when you nearly choke. Puts life back in you. You're not convinced, but he's right about one thing. The warmth spreads fast, down to your fingertips, steadying you against the chill. Around you, the relay works like clockwork. A courier gallops in, leaps off his horse without stopping, and shouts a word. His name, maybe, or the station's password. Someone catches his reins, someone else tosses him a pouch of food, and before you can blink, he's on a fresh horse, gone again into the night. The exchange takes seconds. That, the old handler says, watching with quiet pride, is why no one could outrun us. And he's right. The system wasn't built on speed alone, it was built on continuity. The horses never slept longer than an hour. The riders rotated, but the message never stopped. At its peak, the yam could move a letter across 200 miles in a single day. It was the 13th century equivalent of Wi-Fi that worked everywhere, except, perhaps, in the middle of your apartment at 2 a.m. You walk among the horses, their coats gleaming like brushed bronze. Some toss their heads impatiently, hooves stamping soft divots into the soil. They know what's coming. They live for movement. The Mongols believed their mounts shared a soul with the rider. That man and horse were halves of the same will. Looking into their dark, liquid eyes, you almost believe it. One mare nuzzles your shoulder, breath warm and steady. Her handler laughs softly. She likes you, he says. She's fast, but don't whisper to her unless you mean it. You ask why? He winks. She listens too closely. The riders around you move like dancers, each step practiced. One tightens a strap, another checks the seal on a dispatch case. No one raises their voice. No one wastes a gesture. Even exhaustion looks efficient here. You sit near the fire as the stars slide higher. The old handler settles beside you, rubbing his hands. We used to say, he begins, the horses dreamed so the empire could stay awake. He chuckles, a dry sound that vanishes into the wind. Some of them ran until their hearts gave out. We buried them standing, so the wind would still find them ready. You glance at him. He's not being poetic. He's remembering. The way his eyes drift toward the horizon, you suspect he once rode, too. Maybe long enough to forget what stillness felt like. In the distance, another courier approaches, a dark figure against the moonlit steppe, moving fast, the sound of hooves swelling until it fills the night like a heartbeat. When he arrives, the exchange repeats in perfect rhythm. One horse stumbles in, another bolts out. The breath of the empire, uninterrupted. You realize something strange. The couriers don't talk about glory or conquest. They talk about timing, about being part of a living system that never stops breathing. You can't help thinking of it as a body. The horse is the muscles, the rider's the blood, the road's the veins. The message? The soul, perhaps. Some scholars say, the old man murmurs, that the great Khan's greatest weapon wasn't his army, but his information. While other kings waited weeks for news, he heard within days. That's how empires are won, not by swords, but by speed. He looks at you for a long time, eyes reflecting the firelight. You have your machines now, he adds softly. You think you're faster. Maybe you are. But do your messages mean as much? You can't answer. You just stare into the fire, listening to the hoofbeats fading into the dark, knowing that somewhere, far beyond your reach, another rider is already galloping under the same stars, the same moon, the same endless wind. The horses shift, restless again. Their muscles ripple like the surface of a living drum. You think about what the old man said, that the horses never slept. Maybe that's the secret of endurance, to live half awake, half dreaming, always in motion. You close your eyes, feeling the vibration of hooves under the ground, steady and soft. The rhythm grows slower, quieter, like a lullaby played on distant thunder. And as the fire crackles and the world hums around you, you realize you're starting to drift, carried, like the message, into another kind of silence. When you wake, dawn has already found the edges of the horizon, smearing it with pale gold. The air tastes faintly of ash and new beginnings. You stretch, joints cracking like kindling, and listen, nothing but the low hiss of wind through the grass. The relay behind you has gone quiet, as if it never existed. Only hoofprints remain, already fading. You ride west again, and for a while, the world feels almost empty. No birds, no people, only the muted thud of hooves and the rhythm of your breath. Then, somewhere in that silence, you catch it, a faint sound, like someone drumming their fingers on the inside of the earth. Another rider. He appears over a low ridge, wrapped in furs, his face hidden behind a scarf. You nod, but he doesn't wave. He just gestures toward the trail ahead, then melts back into the horizon. Silent riders, that's what they called them. The best of the couriers, the ones trusted with messages too important to risk words. You wonder what that must feel like, to live your whole life in motion, to sleep sitting up, to carry news that might never belong to you. These men and women were trained from childhood. They could read the sky like a calendar and the dirt like a diary. The Mongols didn't need compasses. They read the world. A broken twig meant someone passed hours ago. A patch of grass pressed flat showed where a horse had rested. They listened to wind direction, smelled the air for traces of smoke. Their silence wasn't mystery. It was focus, sharpened by survival. You dismount at a stream to water your horse. The silence here feels sacred, as if the steppe itself is listening. You cup water in your hands. It's cold, clean, with a faint metallic taste. Behind you, the horse lowers its head to drink, muscles quivering under the light. For a moment, you imagine the silent riders still roaming somewhere out there, phantoms of motion, half memory, half myth. People say they could travel whole nights without lighting a fire, reading the landscape by moonlight alone. A gust of wind blows across your face, carrying the scent of pine from far-off forests. You close your eyes and almost hear voices in it, echoes of couriers whispering directions to one another in a language no longer spoken. You ride again, and the world feels different now, emptier but also more aware. Every rustle of grass becomes a clue, every shadow a companion. You start to notice details you'd have missed before, how the ground dips near water, how birds fly lower before a storm. You're learning to read the steppe, one silent syllable at a time. By dusk, clouds gather, purple and heavy. The air grows thick with the promise of rain. You find shelter under a rock ledge and light a small fire, careful to keep it low. The flame flickers weakly, throwing orange light across your hands. From your pack, you pull a piece of parchment, not yours, but one entrusted to you. The seal glows faintly in the firelight. You resist the urge to open it. You think of the silent riders who carried letters through snow, through war, through hunger, without once breaking their oath. The rain begins, soft at first, then steady. It drums on your cloak, on the earth, on your thoughts. You close your eyes and let the sound blend with your heartbeat. Some historians claim that the silent riders were more than messengers, that they were spies, trained to observe without being seen. Others argue they were monks of motion, believing silence itself a kind of worship. But maybe they were just tired people doing impossible work, too focused to waste breath on conversation. You glance at your horse, who's standing calmly in the rain, eyes half-lidded, as if understanding all this better than you ever could. You think, not for the first time, that the empire's truest philosophers probably had 4 legs. The storm passes as quickly as it came. You look out over the wet grass, the faint shimmer of puddles catching moonlight. Somewhere in the distance, another rider moves, just a silhouette, gliding over the plain, no sound, no light, just motion. You wonder if anyone ever wrote their names down. Probably not. History remembers kings and conquerors, not the ones who carried their words. The fire burns low. The air smells of wet earth and wood smoke. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling the faint pulse of exhaustion in your bones. Somewhere behind your eyelids, the world fades into the rhythm of rain and hooves. You imagine the silent riders galloping beside you, endless, faceless, tireless, carrying the empire's breath across the dark. The night folds around you like a blanket, and before you know it, you're asleep, dreaming of hoofbeats that never stop. By the time the next morning unfurls, the steppe has changed again, softer now, gentler, washed clean by the night's rain. The grass gleams in thin silver lines, each blade tipped with dew like tiny mirrors. The world feels reborn, though your bones politely disagree. You climb into the saddle, wincing at muscles that have filed official complaints, and set off toward the foothills rising in the distance. For days, you followed the sound of hooves and wind, but today you hear something different, echoes. The landscape begins to fold and rise, the air thick with mountain breath. Ahead, the road, if it can be called that, narrows between craggy cliffs that lean over you like skeptical old men. Every sound rebounds a dozen times. The creak of leather, the huff of your horse, even your heartbeat coming back slightly late, as if reminding you that sound itself travels slower in the high air. This is the route through the Altai, where the empire's veins crossed mountains instead of plains. You ride into it carefully. The Mongols, for all their ferocity, were patient planners. When cliffs blocked their way, they didn't turn back. They found ways to speak through stone. You pass what looks like a pile of old firewood, until a closer look reveals it's not wood at all, but thin poles and charred fabric, the remains of a signal post. Your guide, a wiry man with wind-burnt cheeks, nods toward it. Echo Tower, he says, used to send messages when riders couldn't pass. You tilt your head, curious. He explains, when the weather turned or roads flooded, the couriers used echoes and smoke. A shout, a drumbeat, a column of fire. Each had meaning. 2 short beats might mean, all clear. 3 long ones, trouble ahead. At night, fire replaced sound, flickering messages from mountain to mountain like fireflies with very stressful jobs. You listen, imagining it. The mountains alive with coated thunder, flames speaking across miles of stone. The idea feels ancient and elegant, like a conversation between giants. He dismounts, searching through the rubble until he finds a small bronze disc, a gong, half buried in moss. He holds it up reverently. They use these too. One rider beats it once, the next station listens. The mountains carry the message. You can almost hear it, faintly, the ghost of that metallic hum vibrating through the cold air. He strikes it once, soft, but the sound lingers, bending and stretching until it fades into the cliffs. You smile. A mountain telegraph, you say? He grins, teeth bright against the wind. The first one. You keep moving, weaving through narrow passes where the walls glow with thin light. Somewhere above, a hawk circles, a dark curve against the pale sky. The air smells of wet stone and lichen. Your horse's hooves strike sparks on the trail, each step echoing twice, once here, once far away. At midday, you reach a high plateau where the wind never stops talking. The guide gestures to a tall pile of stones, an ovu, a sacred cairn. He dismounts and adds a small rock to the pile, bowing slightly. You do the same, because superstition feels like respect when you're this high up. He tells you how couriers would leave messages here too, not written, but spoken. They'd whisper news to the wind, believing it would carry their words down the valleys faster than they could ride. Some historians dismiss it as folklore. Others note that, oddly enough, those wind messages sometimes reached stations days before the couriers themselves. Maybe the wind had better scheduling. The path climbs higher still. The world narrows to stone, air, and heartbeat. You pass a frozen stream, then a bridge no wider than your horse's shadow. Below, the world falls away, forests and plains turning miniature. You ask your guide how they navigated these routes and storms. He shrugs. They didn't. They waited. Or they died. His tone isn't cruel, just factual, like describing a coin toss. Sometimes, he adds, the mountains sent avalanches before the messages could pass. The empire called it the silence of stone. You imagine that silence, total, suffocating, the kind that erases even memory. And yet, somehow, the messages survived. Someone always made it through. A new rider would appear, soaked or frostbitten, but breathing, clutching the sealed parchment like a heartbeat. That's the part that never makes it into history books, the stubbornness of continuity. The empire didn't run on glory, it ran on persistence. By evening, the sky begins to bruise into violet. You make camp at a cliff's edge where old signal stones still stand. The guide lights a small fire, carefully shielded, barely visible from afar, and the smoke rises in steady columns. He gestures for you to listen. The wind carries something, faint, distant. A rhythm. 2 quick drum beats, then a pause. Next station, he murmurs. Still working. You smile, half in disbelief, half in wonder. Centuries later, and some ghost of the system still hums. Maybe it's travelers like you, maybe shepherds, maybe the wind remembering its old job. You lie down by the fire, the rock cool against your back. The sky above is a field of stars so thick it feels like you could ride straight into it. The wind hums through the stones, steady and deep, the same note you heard from the gong. The empire's echoes, you think. Not gone, just quieter. As your eyes grow heavy, you imagine 1,000 couriers scattered across the mountains, each one listening for a sound that tells them they're not alone. And for a moment, you hear it too. Faint, patient, eternal. A whisper carried by the wind. The world below the mountains flattens again into plains, softer this time, almost forgiving. The air feels heavier now, not with cold, but with scent, damp soil, distant wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of ink. You didn't expect that last one, but it's there, carried by the wind like a forgotten idea. By noon, you see it, a station unlike the others. Larger, busier, louder. The scriptorium of the Yam, where writers became scribes, and words were given form before galloping again into the world. You dismount and walk into the long wooden hall, and the first thing you notice is the sound, scratching, steady and soft, like rain falling on parchment. Inside, a dozen scribes sit cross-legged, each with a low table, brush, and bowl of black ink. They're copying messages, sealing them, labeling them with wooden tags. The air smells of soot and glue. It feels sacred, not in the way of temples, but in the way libraries make you whisper. A young clerk looks up, ink on his sleeve. Another dispatch. You nod and hand him your packet. He inspects the seal without breaking it, weighs it in his palm as if messages can be measured by importance. Then he smiles faintly. Silk from the west, he murmurs. We'll make it fly. You wander farther in. Along the walls hang scrolls, letters from Persia, decrees from China, maps inked in blues and reds. Some are written on paper, others on silk, and one, astonishingly, on thin leather. You touch the corner of one, feeling the texture. Paper from the west, a voice says behind you. You turn to see an older man, the master scribe, holding a brush that looks older than civilization itself, and ink from the east. Together, they last forever. He gestures for you to sit. Every road, every rider, leads here, he says. But without ink, their hoofbeats vanish. He dips his brush, drawing a single, perfect line on a scrap of parchment. This is permanence, he says softly. This is how the empire remembers itself. You watch the ink bloom across the paper, glistening before it dries. It's mesmerizing. He explains how they mix soot from pine wood with glue made from fish scales, a recipe so secret that even modern chemists can't quite replicate it. The ink lives, he says. It breathes. On humid days, it wakes again. There's something beautiful about that. The idea that writing isn't static, that it can breathe, change, maybe even dream a little. He shows you a collection of brushes, each with a story. One carved from bone, another from bamboo, and one wrapped in silver wire. Persian merchants brought the silver, he says, and Chinese monks taught us the strokes. Without either, our letters would look like frightened ants. You can't help smiling. Frightened ants. He shrugs. Not everyone was born to write beautifully. Some were born to ride beautifully instead. As he works, he tells you how the yam became more than a postal system. It became the empire's nervous system. Couriers brought not just letters but samples of soil, pieces of, or even seeds, so the capital could understand what its empire contained. We carried the world on parchment, he says, dipping his brush again. The scriptorium is quieter now. The clerks have finished their copies and moved to sealing. They drip wax, press the Khan's insignia, and set the scrolls in bundles tied with silk. Each bundle looks fragile, but you know better. These are weapons made of words. You ask him if he ever wonders what the messages say. He smiles, lines deepening around his eyes. Curiosity is how empires fall, he says. We only read what history allows. Outside, the light has softened. The riders come and go in a rhythm you could almost mistake for breathing. A boy brings a tray of tea, black, strong, unforgiving. You drink it slowly, watching the ink stains on your fingers spread like tiny constellations. Some historians still argue, the master scribe says as he wraps another scroll, whether it was the horses or the paper that truly held the empire together. He looks at you, eyes glinting like polished obsidian. But you know, don't you? Without paper, memory dies faster than a tired horse. He hands you a small scrap of parchment, a spare piece, still wet with ink. Take it, he says. Proof that we were here. You step outside, the wind catching your cloak. The paper flutters in your hand, black ink shimmering in the sunlight. Somewhere in the distance, a rider mounts, clutching a new set of messages. Another begins to copy. Another waits for the ink to dry. The empire hums, part muscle, part memory, part miracle. And for a moment, you think maybe the old scribe was right. The Mongols didn't conquer the world with horses or swords. They conquered it with handwriting. By now, the rhythm of the road has woven itself into you. The endless alternation of ride, rest, write, repeat. You barely remember what silence used to sound like before hoofbeats filled every second. But tonight, as the plains darken and the wind dies down, you hear something new. Whispers. Not human ones, but the sound of fabric against leather, the soft shifting of cloaks. You're approaching one of the Khan's listening posts, the empire's ears, as they were quietly called. It looks ordinary from afar. A handful of tents, a ring of torches, horses tethered in neat rows. But as you draw closer, you sense a tension in the air, something sharp and invisible, like the prickle before lightning. A man greets you. Not a courier, not quite a soldier either. His voice is calm, his smile too smooth. You're on time, he says, as though he's been expecting you personally. He leads you to a tent whose flap is tied with red silk, a color that means authority here. Inside, there's no warmth, only parchment, ink, and eyes. Half a dozen men sit cross-legged around a low table, each surrounded by scrolls. Some open them carefully, others merely listen as a scribe reads aloud in a whisper. You recognize the seals of different provinces, Persia, China, Rus. This is where the messages stop being private. This is how the empire listens, your guide says softly. Every letter, every report, every rumor passes through us before reaching the Khan. You watch in silence. The readers move quickly, scanning symbols you barely recognize. Some make notes. Others murmur to one another in a language made of gestures and glances. Every now and then, someone burns a scrap, messages that, apparently, don't deserve to live. A chill runs through you. These are the same couriers you've ridden beside, the same letters you've carried. But here, the intimacy of the yam turns clinical. The riders deliver, the listeners decide. One of the readers looks up at you, eyes dark and clear. "Do not be afraid," he says with the faintest smile. "We don't read your thoughts. Not yet." He gestures to a scroll sealed in gold. "That one, for example. It's about a drought in Khorasan. We'll send word for grain relief tomorrow." He pauses. "And that one," he nods toward another, sealed in blue, "warns of rebellion near Samarkand. The Khan will know before sunrise." You realize this isn't just a postal system. It's surveillance disguised as logistics. Every letter doubles as a report, every courier as an unwitting informant. The empire doesn't just communicate, it absorbs. The man who brought you here, a commander, perhaps, sits beside the table, turning a coin between his fingers. "You see," he says, "speed means nothing without knowledge. We carry not just words, but patterns. Who writes to whom? How often? When they stop." He tosses the coin once, catches it. "That's how you rule the world without leaving your tent." It's an uncomfortable truth, and he knows it. But there's pride in his voice, too. The pride of an architect describing a cathedral no one's supposed to see. He gestures toward a map pinned to the wall. Strings connect cities, provinces, and trade routes, forming a tangled web that looks eerily alive. You realize what it represents: the Khan's network of awareness, the veins and nerves of the empire. "You've heard of the postal riders," he says. "But he taps the table lightly, "we ride the wind." He explains how coded phrases and invisible markings were sometimes hidden in letters, dots and margins, symbols and wax seals, tiny variations in the script. Couriers never knew they carried intelligence, and that was precisely the point. Some historians, he says, leaning back, argue that this was the first organized intelligence agency in the world. Others think that's too flattering. Personally, I think it was just the Khan being thorough. He chuckles, but the sound doesn't reach his eyes. A scribe clears his throat. "New dispatch from the west," he murmurs, handing him a scroll. The commander breaks the seal, scans it quickly, and nods. "Rebellion confirmed. Send a message to Karakoram, double the supply lines." His tone is so casual it makes you shiver. When he's done, he turns to you. "Every rider thinks they carry the empire's breath," he says. "But breath must also be listened to. Otherwise, it's just wind." You nod slowly, unsure whether to feel impressed or uneasy. Later, as you leave the tent, the night feels heavier. The torches flicker like half-awake eyes, and every shadow seems to listen. You mount your horse and ride out into the dark, trying not to think about how many of your own words might have once passed through a place like this. The wind follows you, a soft, cold murmur. You can almost hear it whisper. The emperor hears everything. You shiver, pulling your cloak closer. The stars above look indifferent, as they always do. You remind yourself that even empires have to sleep eventually. But for now, tonight, this one is still awake, still listening, still writing its secrets into the wind. The road west begins to thin, not in width, but in spirit. The stations grow quieter, the horses fewer, the banners more faded. You can feel it in the air, the slow exhale of something immense beginning to tire. The Mongol Empire, once so alive with motion, is breathing slower now. You ride past an abandoned yam post at dawn. The roofs have caved in, the hearths filled with weeds. The walls, once marked with painted symbols, are now streaked with rain and bird droppings. Your horse steps cautiously around the fallen beams. It smells faintly of dust and distance, the scent of a story ending. The road is still there, but it no longer hums. It creaks. You can almost hear the ghosts of hooves that used to thunder across it. You stop by a dry well, tossing a pebble in out of habit. No echo comes back. Just silence. Deep, absolute, the kind that swallows even your thoughts. A young herder appears from nowhere, his face half hidden by a scarf. He stares at you as if uncertain whether you're real. "You're still riding?" he asks. His voice is soft, wary. Most stopped. The posts, they're gone. You ask him what happened. He shrugs. No one knows. Fewer letters. Fewer orders. The empire's too big now. Too many cons. Not enough trust. He points to the horizon, where a crumbling watchtower leans against the sky. "That used to be a relay. My grandfather says riders still pass sometimes, but they don't stop anymore." You thank him and ride on. The wind feels emptier now, carrying no messages, only sand. The grass is overgrown across the trail, nature reclaiming its sentence after centuries of interruption. As the day passes, you begin to see it everywhere. Decay disguised as stillness. Stations turned into barns. Relay stones reused as grave markers. Horses that once carried news now grazing idly in forgotten pastures. It's strange, this quiet collapse. There's no battle, no fire, no catastrophe. Just less. Fewer riders, fewer seals, fewer voices. Empires rarely die with a scream. They fade out like old ink. You remember something the old scribe said back in the scriptorium. Paper lasts longer than memory, but not forever. He was right. You've seen the scrolls curling at their edges, the letters fading to brown ghosts of themselves. And yet, even now, you spot traces. A worn pesa half buried in dust. A stone post carved with Mongol script, its edges softened by wind. Fragments of a language that once ruled the world, now mumbling to itself in erosion. By evening, the sky turns copper red, the kind of light that makes everything look older than it is. You make camp near the ruins of another station, just a few broken beams and a circle of stones. You light a fire, small and shy, and the smoke drifts up through the roofless sky. The wind carries voices again, or maybe just memory pretending to be sound. You hear laughter, faint, scattered, the kind of noise that feels borrowed from another century. Riders sharing stories, boasting about speed, teasing one another about whose horse could outrun the wind. Then the echo fades, and all that's left is you, your fire, and the sigh of grass. Some historians, you recall, say the fall began not with rebellion, but with paperwork. The yam was expensive, feeding horses, maintaining stations, paying couriers. When trade slowed, the funds dwindled. What was once the empire's bloodstream became its burden. Others argue it was pride. Local rulers building their own little networks, cutting the old one apart. You suppose both could be true. Empires rarely die from a single wound. They bleed from many small ones. You watch the flames flicker. The horse shifts beside you, restless. You reach out, patting its neck. "It's not your fault," you whisper. You ran as far as you could. A shooting star crosses the sky, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. You find yourself thinking about the riders who came before, those who lived their whole lives between horizons, never settling, never stopping. What happened to them when the roads went silent? Did they go home, if they even remembered where that was? Or did they keep riding until the world forgot their names? The wind stirs the ashes. You swear it sounds like hoofbeats, slow now, fading, fading. Maybe that's how empires end, not in defeat, but in fatigue. Not in flames, but in forgetting. You lie back on your blanket, staring up at the stars that once guided 1,000 couriers. They still shine, indifferent to what vanished below. The universe, it seems, keeps no receipts. The fire dies to embers. The silence deepens until even memory starts to sleep. And in that stillness, you whisper a small prayer, not for the empire, but for the riders who kept it alive. The ones who believed in the simple, stubborn act of delivering something worth carrying. The sun rises gray, not gold, the kind of morning that feels like a sigh. You pack slowly, your movements mechanical, as though the road itself has become heavier. Somewhere in the distance, a raven calls. Once, twice. Then the silence folds over it like a blanket. You ride toward the west again, though there's no order to carry now. The yam is gone. The stations are abandoned, and yet the instinct remains. It's strange how momentum can survive purpose. The horse still knows which way to face, even when there's no destination left. After several hours, you see smoke. Not the wild kind of war, but the gentle kind of cooking. You approach cautiously. A solitary tent stands beside a low ridge, its felt patched and sun-bleached. A single horse grazes nearby, old but sturdy. An old man emerges from the tent. His back is bent, his clothes threadbare, but his eyes, they hold the kind of clarity that comes only from distance. He squints at you, then smiles faintly. "You're late," he says. You dismount, confused. For what? He gestures to a wooden box beside the fire, small, weathered, sealed with wax. "A message," he says. "Been waiting for someone to finish the ride." You kneel, brushing the dust off its surface. The wax is cracked, the seal half broken, the symbol of a long-dead Khan. "How long has it been here?" you ask. He laughs, the sound like dry paper. "Longer than either of us has years to count." He lowers himself onto a stool and pours tea that tastes faintly of smoke and rain. "My father was a courier. His father too. When the stations died, some of us stayed. Someone had to keep the last road warm." You stare at him, and it hits you. This man is the last rider. Or rather, the last echo of one. A living fragment of a system that once spanned continents. His tent is the final outpost of the yam, a heartbeat so faint you can barely hear it. He notices your expression and chuckles. "You think I'm a ghost?" "Maybe," you say softly. "But ghosts usually don't make tea." He pours another cup, nodding toward the box. "That's the last message we never delivered. No one came to take it. No one to receive it. Just sat there, waiting. Like me." You run your thumb along the faded seal. Part of you wants to open it, but something stops you. Respect, perhaps, or superstition. "Do you know what it says?" He shakes his head. "Doesn't matter. It's not the words that mattered. It's the carrying." Outside, the wind stirs the grass, soft and rhythmic, almost like hooves. He closes his eyes, listening. "Hear that?" he whispers. "They're still out there. The ones who never stopped." You sit beside him, staring into the fire. The flames crackle, reflected in his tired eyes. "I used to think," he continues, "that the riders served the empire. But maybe we serve something bigger. Connection, maybe. The belief that distance doesn't have to mean silence." You nod, the truth of it sitting heavy in your chest. "Do you ever think of opening it? The message?" He smiles. "No. Once you open it, it stops being a promise. You stay until evening. The light turns amber, then fades into blue. The old man grows quiet, his breathing slow, measured. The horse outside lowers its head to graze one last time. Finally, he says, "I won't be here tomorrow. The road will be yours then. Just keep riding. Someone must." You don't know what to say, so you sit in silence, the kind that feels like a prayer. That night, you dream of him, younger, strong, his horse galloping across an endless plain. He rides without a destination, following stars that refuse to fade. The wind sings around him, carrying his laughter far beyond the horizon. When you wake, the tent is still. The fire has gone out. The old man is gone too, his cloak folded neatly beside the sealed box. You sit for a long time, listening to the world breathe. Then, with quiet hands, you tie the box to your saddle. The horse lifts its head, ears flicking forward. It knows what to do. As you ride out, you glance back once, the tent already half hidden by grass. For a moment, you could swear you see him standing there, one hand raised in farewell. Or maybe it's just the heat bending the air. The road stretches before you, empty and endless. The message bumps softly against your leg with each stride, a heartbeat in a wooden box. Somewhere, a historian might call this the end of the Mongol postal network. But as you ride into the dusk, you realize they're wrong. Endings are just what historians write when the riders stop answering. The empire may have fallen asleep, but its messages are still out there, waiting for someone, anyone, to keep them moving. And so, you ride. Into the wind. Into time. Into silence that remembers every hoofbeat. The wind is gentle tonight, soft as breath, carrying the faint scent of rain. You ride slower now, not because the horse is tired, but because the world itself seems to have relaxed, exhaling after centuries of holding its breath. The horizon stretches endlessly, a canvas brushed in silver and blue. Somewhere far behind you lies everything that once was: empires, riders, the hum of hoofbeats that once shook the world awake. You reach a low rise and stop. The last light of dusk slides off your cloak and spills across the steppe. In that glow, you could almost believe the earth still remembers. Perhaps it does. Every path you've ridden, from Karakorum to the Caspian, still hums faintly beneath the soil, as if the ghosts of couriers are running beneath your feet, carrying invisible messages through the roots of grass. You think of the old man's words. It's not the words that mattered. It's the carrying. Somewhere to the north, traders still follow those routes. Their caravans drag the same lines across the map, though now the cargo is silk, salt, ideas, not letters sealed by a Khan's ring. To the south, a road once traced by Mongol horses is now paved in asphalt. Trucks roar where riders once whispered. The message continues, only faster, noisier, and far less poetic. You smile at the thought. Maybe nothing ever truly ends. Maybe it just changes format. The stars begin to appear, one by one, old friends arriving fashionably late. You set down the wooden box beside you, brushing away a thin film of dust. The seal catches the starlight, faint but steady. You wonder, for the first time, who the message was meant for. A general? A lover? A poet waiting for permission to return home? It doesn't matter now. The message has traveled farther than it was ever supposed to. That, in its own way, is a kind of completion. The air cools. The grass whispers softly against your boots. Somewhere nearby, a lone wolf calls, long and low, its voice blending into the sighing wind. You lie back on the ground, arms folded beneath your head, and let the sound carry you. The sky above seems endless, but not empty. You imagine every star as a lantern from a long-dead station, each one lit by a rider who refused to stop. Some historians, you recall, say the Yam was humanity's first network, not just of roads, but of trust. And as the night deepens, you decide they were right. Every civilization since has tried to rebuild that feeling, the belief that a message, once sent, will reach someone, somewhere, who's still awake. You close your eyes. The horse shifts nearby, snorting softly. The wind hums through the grass, weaving sound and silence together like thread through fabric. For a moment, it feels like everything is speaking at once. The earth, the stars, the memory of hoofbeats. You imagine the couriers, men and women whose names no one remembers, riding through storms, deserts, and nights like this. You see them handing messages hand to hand, their eyes steady, their trust absolute. None of them knew how long the system would last. They just rode, because someone had to. And maybe that's what history really is. Not a series of victories or defeats, but a relay. One voice passing something precious to the next, hoping it won't be dropped before dawn. The box rests beside you, sealed and silent. You leave it there. The message has done its work simply by enduring. You let your thoughts drift, untethered, until they soften into something quieter than language. The world blurs at the edges. The sound of wind fades into rhythm, steady and slow, like a heartbeat echoing from very far away. The stars shimmer. The grass bends. The steppe exhales one last time. And as sleep finally folds over you, the ancient hoofbeats begin again, soft, patient, endless, carrying words you'll never need to hear. End of script. Sweet dreams.